I am going to call the special meeting of Rush Lake Watershed to order Saturday, March 30th, 2019 at 9:02 at the Nepieskin Town Hall. Here in attendance at the meeting are, of the 11 directors, all but 2 presently, and an audience of roughly a dozen to a dozen and a half people. There is a sign-in sheet at the door before leaving. I please ask that you do sign in so that we've got you on the list. Also on that listing are, if you are interested in receiving Rush Lake Watershed emails, being on a steering committee or a subcommittee, being considered for a director position as we have elections coming up, and there's another box. Maybe I covered them all. You can check that, and I'd follow up with you later. Beyond that and signing in, welcome to our meeting here today. Very excited to launch the Lake Management Planning Project for Rush Lake. We're excited to share that Rush Lake Watershed Restoration has received a $25,000 Lake Management Planning Grant, large scale, and we are beginning that process now. So, one question that I want to answer before we begin is another planning grant. Why would we go for a planning grant? Since we started down this road over a year ago, many have asked me this. After all, we have done this once before. In the early 2000s, we developed a lake management plan to address the issues on Rush Lake. And to sum it up today, I would say that lake could have been characterized as having little vegetation and terrible water quality. It was poor habitat. Today, things are much improved, in large parts to the efforts of so many of whom are in the room today. So I'd like to take a moment to summarize. The prior lake management plan focused on 5 key areas for improvement, but the plan was quite focused. In short, there was a 2-year drawdown, and a new dam was installed to aid in regulating water levels. These efforts, with ongoing carp management, were expected to regrow vegetation, provide clean water, and those results would in turn improve habitat, improve the fishery, and limit wildlife access to lead. Today, things are different. Vegetation is abundant, water is clean, and the habitat and the fishery improvements can be seen by looking at your daily bag. But the primary emergent vegetation was not hardstem bulrush, the plant that Rush Lake was named for. Instead, it was invasive cattail. The lake management plan of the 2000s did not address what was to be done if invasive cattail was the primary regrowth. Invasive cattail, while good for water quality, vigorously outcompetes preferred native plants and overgrows areas of the lake to the point that they are limited use for fish, wildlife, and people. Our current estimates of invasive cattail populations on Rush Lake is just shy of 2,700 acres. We anticipate that this lake management plan will develop a solution to that, to improve the kinds of vegetation and to improve where the vegetation is or isn't. To look at it from another angle, without a lake management plan, there are risks to the long-term health of Rush Lake. 2 are 1, we could just have higher populations of cattails, more than we even have today. But another is deteriorating water quality, which could occur from nutrient loading from runoff. If that were to happen, the prior lake management plan identified drawdown as the solution for improving that. It is important to say that a thoughtfully developed lake management plan today and in the years to come will be used to move into the next phase of the Rush Lake restoration through implementation grants, which will help us achieve the goals that we'll develop in this plan. While challenging, I'm personally energized by this one question. If you can't restore bulrush on Rush Lake, where can you? If there is a place that we can develop a roadmap for turning the table on invasive cattail, this is it. We are here today because of committed partners who have seen the opportunity that's presented to us, and I'd like to introduce them. First, this board, which is comprised primarily of appointees from towns in the watersheds of Rush Lake and the Waukon 8 Mile Creek watershed. I'd like to thank the town of Nepieskin, town of Ripon, town of Utica, and town of Rushford for their board appointments, cash, and in-kind contributions, which help us achieve our mission. Second, the Wisconsin DNR. Namely, I'd like to mention Ellen Barth and Ted Johnson, who have attended numerous meetings over the years, and since the prior restoration have regularly been at the meetings and have served as a resource. Without the DNR and their council, Rush Lake Watershed would not be meeting here today to kick off this lake management planning project. Ted Johnson is in attendance at today's meeting. Ted, would you like to say anything as we get started?
I just want to congratulate you on obtaining the large-scale planning grant. You were the highest-ranked project out of 20-some, so that says something. Melissa and Brett put a lot of work into that. Just one thing on lake management plans, you get out of them what you put into them. The more you put into them, you'll see yield results. And I guess with that said, I know a lot of, when I've been at these meetings, it's been a lot of talk about cattails, and I understand that, and I see the problem, definitely, but the watershed and nutrients coming in from the watershed are part of the reason why we have the cattail problem that we have. So we need to address the watershed as well. Keep that in mind, but that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Ted.
Sure.
Third, I'd like to introduce Stantec and our project manager, Melissa Curran, who's joining us today. Stantec is no stranger to Rush Lake. Stantec served us in the 2000s, then as Northern Environmental. Today, Melissa and Stantec have taken initiative to be a strong partner, help us apply for grants that can help us realize our goals, and manage and perform the project now, and be a long-term partner to manage future efforts. Melissa, would you like to say anything as we begin?
Sure. So I'm really excited to be part of this exciting opportunity. I know you guys really value Rush Lake. It's an important lake. There's a lot going on here, and Stantec has a wide range of expertise. So my role in particular is to help find some of the grant funding that will need not only to make it through the planning process, but also do implementation within the lake and in the watershed. We also have a full-service restoration team that can assist with some of the cattail control, should that be one of the actions that comes out of the management plan. So I'm really excited to really kind of get into the details of the plan and be a long-term partner for everybody.
Thank you, Melissa. Fourth, I'd like to introduce UW-Stevens Point and Professor Dr. Kyle Herman. Dr. Herman has enthusiastically met with us to discuss this opportunity. He has pledged support for our lake management planning initiative, including collection of samples and related testing. The prior lake management plan included surveys of lake sediment, and Dr. Herman's team will address that now, which will identify opportunities like the seed bank and the viability of it, risks to wildlife such as lead in the sediments, and improve the understanding of water quality, which will be done through phosphorus testing in the lake sediment. Dr. Herman, would you like to say any words?
Welcome, or thank you everybody for having me here, Kyle. I'm going to be here to listen to what your needs are, what you want from an objective perspective, and be here as a resource for you. So we pride ourselves at the university of being management oriented, and I'm here as a resource. So what you guys want to see happen with your lake, so that I can provide some help.
Thank you, Kyle. Fifth, I want to mention Ducks Unlimited and Brian Glenzinski. Their name alone speaks volumes, but it's worth reminding everyone that Ducks Unlimited was a key partner in the prior restoration project. Ducks Unlimited performed a number of critical functions on the initial restoration project, and they deserve much credit for the resulting successes on Rush Lake. Recently, their contributions in the watershed can be seen through their acquisition on the Tews property on the northwest side of Rush Lake, which they target for restoration. Brian is on the phone today. Brian, would you like to say any remarks as we begin the meeting?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I just like to say, DU is primarily an implementer. We take pride in putting habitat on the ground, but these plans feed right into implementation, as Brett alluded to, and so I've been through a couple of these at Big Muskego and some other shallow lakes, so really excited to see where this takes us as far as implementation, and then also, we are actively working with the DNR and other partners doing habitat work on Rush Lake. So how our current work fits into this plan is going to be critical as well. So happy to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Thank you, Brian. I have one last party I want to introduce, and that's the public. You. We're here because of all of you. Rush Lake Watershed Restoration, Inc. is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, and we only survive and continue our efforts because of donations of time, talent, money, and in-kind items, which help us achieve our mission. The original Rush Lake project relied heavily on volunteer involvement, and this lake management plan and work that will follow will positively be impacted by your contributions. And I just want to offer, does anybody in the audience care to make any comments at this point? If not, we look forward to working with you as we develop the lake management plan, and set course for the next phase of the restoration on Rush Lake. The second agenda item is contract review and approval. There are a number of contracts, and this isn't meant to be stuffy, this is meant to go quick. November 26th, so first I want to start with the DNR's grant agreement that was provided to me. In November 26th meeting, we signed an authorizing resolution that allowed me to sign that contract that was presented to me from the DNR. The duties outlined in 4.06 of our bylaws also give me the authority to sign that contract. I've shared that contract with all directors, yet I have not signed it. I am prepared to sign and accept the contract at the conclusion of this discussion, and the reasons for that are the following reasons. In reading through it, the agreement seems very standard. I didn't read anything in there that was controversial that gave me pause or reason not to sign or look for any reason to change. The administrative effort and governance aspect of the project. My background is I'm a CPA, and I've spoken through Todd in advance, and submitting what the DNR requires for substantiation of completion of the project is something that I would prepare a review packet for Todd, which would be based off of invoices and the project plan that we have here from our partners, whether they're Stantec or Stevens Point, and we would I'd prepare that, provide it to Todd, and he would review. So we have preparation and review and sign off. So from an administrative effort standpoint, there's nothing special that needs to be done. Todd and I can address that. For 2019, the Lake Management Planning project cost to Rush Lake Watershed is within previously resolved amounts. In our October meeting of last year, we resolved to spend between $1,400 and $1,800 on lake and stream sampling on and around Rush Lake. And the lake management planning budget, if the cash budget of $30,931, if I subtract from that the cash that's coming from the Department of Natural Resources and cash contributions from some of the towns, the Rush Lake Watershed cash share of the project as it stands today is $1,431, which is in the range we previously resolved. And finally, I'm prepared to sign it because I believe the project will be able to be completed without any special financing terms, needing a banker to come into play. And basically, this contract has a box that we can check, which will provide us a grant advance of 3/4 of the DNR grant. And between that and our treasury, that will cover all but just over $2,000 of the total cash cost of the project. With the town contributions coming in place, we have excess funds of $2,000 and in play. So the project will be billed on a monthly basis from Stantec. At least that's what's in the contract and seems reasonable to me. We don't really have any any risk of the treasury going dry unless the towns all hold out on their contribution until very late in the year, and or we have limited fundraising through the year. And through the RLWRI, Vines and Rush's Cause of the Monday fundraiser event that's coming, and just donations from individuals, I don't see how we wouldn't be able to cover that and wait for that final reimbursement to come from the Department of Natural Resources once we complete our summary report next January or February. So for those reasons, I feel very comfortable signing this, and I want to ask the board, are there any remarks on why I should not sign this? Otherwise, I will at this time.
I have no concerns.
I think it looks pretty good.
Okay.
No concerns.
No concerns. Comprehensive.
It's good.
Okay. With that,
I have no concerns.
you have no concerns, Todd? Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to page 3 under special conditions. I'm checking the box, requesting the advance, and I'm signing it now. we are in business. Second contract that could be in place, but isn't today, is a plant survey. In speaking with Melissa, the aquatic plant survey isn't a service that Stantec provides. I spoke with the individuals from the Request for Proposal Steering Committee earlier, which were myself, Ron, Doug, and Bruce, in regard to requesting a proposal from a company to complete this part of the project. And there are two candidates that we decided was a good pool to apply to. One was Cason and Associates, who was a original proposal partner on the overall lake management planning project. They do perform aquatic plant surveys, which in line with what we'd be needing. Another one is with Wisconsin Lake and Pond Resource, which is out of El Dorado, and Stantec referred us to them, and the individual who would be running the project there is named Jim Scharl, who completed the prior survey on Rush Lake in 2008. So he's by no means green either. So with those two, we felt strong that we have two strong candidates to complete that task, and I've submitted the request for proposals to them, and I've asked them to provide them in advance of our April meeting so we can hopefully make a decision at that time. That item is a $6,000 item in our budget, and that's just for what it's worth. That's the pool that we're talking about of money. So nothing today on that. Third item in potential contracts. Kyle, I haven't received anything from you, and I'm not sure if I should be expecting anything from Point. Do you need anything to make this official?
From the subcontract perspective, I'm still running it up our food chain. Our university is dealing with internal stuff right now, so it's hard for me to get a hold of our grants operation folks.
Sure.
So as soon as I get an answer back from them, I'll be in contact with you.
Okay.
I don't imagine it's all just state level paperwork, and they've got people that need to approve everything.
Okay. Got it. So we'll sit tight on that. And the last contract is Stantec's, which includes education and outreach on the project, helping us conduct a survey, project management oversight, an evaluation of muskrat populations by inventorying or counting muskrat houses, and nutrient loading analysis. I've provided this to all the directors. Melissa, I had a previous question kicked out to you before. I have I had that original question, and I have one other question, but I wonder if there are any other questions from someone else on the board. I don't know of anyone who does, so that's an open-ended question.
I had a question. Melissa, on the terms and conditions on the end of the contract, on the limitation of liability, partway through that paragraph, it talks about a limit of $50,000. Is that specific to this project, or is that for everything that you do?
This is a standard contract, so my message to Brett was if you guys have edits, just provide them to me, and then I'll provide them to our legal team to review. And so something like that, increasing that amount is something we commonly see. And typically it's not too big of a deal, especially if I can convey to them sort of the scope of the overall long-term project. So really all I need from you guys is edits that I can bring forward to my legal team.
So I assume the rest of those terms and conditions are pretty much boilerplate, and they apply to every project, but the $50,000 limit could possibly be amended.
Correct.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Question, how would that impact the billing to us if you increase that, no scale change?
No, it doesn't really impact my role, but Stantec's role that we're providing to.
Okay, thank you.
I did have one. It just gets into the scope of services, and it's minor. I'd like to add a sentence that incorporates the planning grant by reference. And the reason for that is in the planning grant, all these sections, they break down activity, method, and data collected. And I see from your summarized scope of services, it generally aligns to activity. And I just don't want the method to be lost because it's not in here, that it's something that, oops, we didn't do it, but we were planning on doing it, but it didn't make it there. So I'm just looking to add an extra sentence to the end of that scope of services that incorporates the planning grant application by reference to supplement the above scopes, which it already kind of mentions, because the next bullet of assumptions, it says our scope and cost is based on an understanding of the project as defined in the DNR surface water grant application. So it seems...
I can take that up, but can you actually give me the grant number that must be written on the DNR contract?
Yes. It is LPL 169519.
Okay. And so I'll specifically mention that grant number.
Okay.
Application in a sentence or two that I have.
Perfect. Okay. The other question that I had out to Melissa in advance, and I tipped off the directors about that, was just and it was in the section that Ron looked at, was the limitation of liability and indemnification. Understand why it's there, because you're doing work that we're asking you to do, so you're doing it for us. But that's just one of the reason why I'm looking at that was just that's one of the items that could be a potential exclusion as it relates to insurance. If we indemnify somebody and we get implicated in a lawsuit as a result of that indemnification, then the insurance doesn't provide any coverage for us. Now, chances are we would be in a same lawsuit anyway, so it seems kind of like nothing to do about anything, because it's not like you'd be named and we wouldn't. And we've talked before about being listed as additional insured on each other's insurance policies as it relates to the project. So I had one other comment in the task list. Melissa, you did identify some in-kind contributions on task 2 and task 3. I don't know if we could call those out. There was 1,000 on each line item. And also, just one question for you, that task 1 and the 5,000 in kind, that project development and grant preparations, that's all forward looking, right? Okay, just it read that way, but I wanted to make sure. Okay, does anybody else have anything with the contract?
So Brett, you'll work on some contract language changes. Is that the plan? And it would be best if they were, I can provide a Word document of the terms and conditions, and then if you had maybe some track changes that you wanted to see, that's probably the best way for me to communicate with our legal team.
I like that approach. So if it's acceptable to the other directors, I'd get that from Melissa. Look to incorporate the inclusion of that sentence, which includes the DNR grant application by reference with the scope, and make a modification or two to that limitation of liability in regard to amount and the potentially indemnification.
And there is, just so everyone knows, there are different terms and conditions we use for different amounts. So, 50,000 threshold, this is just a 2-page terms and conditions. Once it gets more than 50,000, there's a 4-page terms and conditions. So I'm going to go ahead and send you the 4-pager right away so you guys can take a look at both of them.
Okay.
And we can, when it gets to the point where maybe we have a bigger scope, we've already addressed some of those concerns.
Yeah. What I don't want to do is I don't want to not sign a contract with Stantec because we're horsing around on what does this legalese say and defer to another meeting. So what does the board think about Ron and I just connecting on whatever that new terms and conditions are and just saying okay or yay or nay and just getting on with the show?
Yes. really ballpark, just go for it.
I don't have a problem.
I don't either. That's fine.
Okay. See you nodding heads. Okay, so we'll do that. Melissa will work with you after the meeting to see what we can tweak, and we'll get that signed, and we'll be off and running with the project officially with you.
And it's very rare where we come to an impasse where we can't work through changes, so typically we're minor.
Yep. Okay. So with that concludes the contract review and approval part of this meeting. There will be a future agenda item in April for lake planning or the aquatic plant survey. But other than that, that concludes it for today. Unless anybody has anything else? No? Okay. Okay. Next item. Agenda item 3, establishing a steering committee. This gets into activity 2C of our planning grant. Rush Lake Watershed Restoration and Partners will assemble a group of stakeholders, agencies, and other interested parties to participate in a planning committee to provide administrative structure for developing strategies to improve the ecological health of the lake. The committee will develop planning and management actions through collaboration with all the project partners and public based on information collected during project meetings, outreach, site-specific surveys. A number of actions will be developed which will address a comprehensive assessment of nutrient sources, runoff, shoreline protection, fish management, wildlife habitat, water quality standards, aquatic plant management, land conservation, preservation, such as easements, buffers, set-aside program, and education. Site-specific surveys and data collection along with the historic data will be analyzed to produce specific management strategies to address aquatic plant management needs, water level management and control strategy, locations for habitat improvements, and water quality project within the watershed. So the deliverable and outcome is the committee will rank and prioritize planning and management strategies based on the project purpose and need and public input. Subsequent grant funds for planning and management will be based on the committee recommendations. So that is what the itch that we are scratching in the grant application. And I do want to call out that as far as subcommittees or special committees go, our bylaws, item 3.12 addresses it. It says the board of directors by resolution adopted by an affirmative vote of a majority of the number of directors may designate such committees as it deems appropriate. So before talking any sort of composition or anything like that, I'm going to motion now to create a steering committee for the lake management plan consistent with the planning grant application.
I'll second that motion.
So the motion is made and seconded to create a steering committee for the lake management plan consistent with the DNR planning grant application. Is there any discussion on the topic before we wish to vote? If not, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
There's Todd. Aye. Todd is an aye. Opposed? No one's opposed. So anybody withholding their vote? No. Okay, so it's unanimous for creating the steering committee. Now, let's talk composition, and this is going to be free-flowing. The prior steering committee had 15 members on it, and that prior steering committee is on this poster board right here. This is the predecessor of Rush Lake Watershed Restoration, Inc. There were stakeholder appointments from the towns. We had an individual from wildlife, an individual from water with the DNR. We had U.S. Fish and Wildlife representation, and we had county land and water representation. That was a 15-person steering committee. But I wonder if we did it again the same way, it would be 17, which would include all Rush Lake Watershed directors, stakeholders, 2 DNR, 1 U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and 1 from Winnebago County. And I just wonder that a 17-person steering committee would really be appropriate, especially if you want to consider having somebody like Kyle Herman from Stevens Point on the steering committee. Then we're at 18. So I have a question on how do we think about composition of the board, of the steering committee, given our past which was this, but we didn't exist back then, and now, because I personally could see an argument that we have less directors of Rush Lake Watershed on the steering committee, and I could personally argue that we could benefit from having more individuals on the steering committee. Like, for instance, Brian Glinzinski said he has expressed interest on being on the steering committee. We had no Ducks Unlimited representation, so if we had the same approach as before, plus Kyle and Brian, we're at 19. So I just opened with some initial thoughts, and what are your thoughts on composition? And I'd like to start with you, Ted.
Well, I think you need to have somebody from the County Land Conservation Department, like Chad Casper. They're a huge partner. He's been involved in other steering teams and other management plans I'm working on. He could help you with commercial plant mapping on the lake as well. So that's at least one more above and beyond what you mentioned already. I've never been on a steering team with that many members, usually 12 or so, 10, 12. But that's not saying you couldn't. Because you have to have productive dialogue.
Okay. What's your view on stakeholders, Ted? Because in this world, we had 11 stakeholders on that.
Never had that many. I mean, when you say stakeholders, non-board members, just members of the public.
There was no board. We were just regular old people back when.
Right. You want to have each stakeholder represent some sort of user group. Like, a hunter, a trapper, a fisherman, a bird watcher, a recreational user. Because you want to represent all the interests in the watershed, if you can. Major uses of the lake in the area.
But you're saying it should be a member of a organized group, not necessarily just someone who's attended a lot of these meetings, is just a private citizen, at-large type person. That usually is not common to include anyone like that.
It doesn't have to be an organized group.
Okay.
Just someone that with a stated purpose that it needs to be somebody that's going to be productive. One person can derail a group pretty quickly. They have axe to grind, so to speak. As long as they're respectful. There needs to be like some ground rules.
Are we looking at putting this in place today, for the most part, or what's the time frame here?
We have another meeting coming up in April right away that would be creating a better composition, thinking it over. But what he was saying, it seems to me that the diversity of the members that have volunteered for board members are bringing a lot of diversity with them. I personally have an interest in birds and invasive plant species and things like that. And I think each member here, trapping, whatever, that mixture is already in this group, but we just want to round it out and find individuals like Kyle that could help us focus better, bring the expertise. So, but yeah, delaying the composition till the next meeting.
As far as my thought on the general public, we could perhaps, if we do wait till our April meeting, if there's anyone really interested from the public, they could certainly submit a letter to Brad or something, and we can kind of approach it that way.
That's fine, and I've got on the sign-in sheet for the meeting, there's a field that you can check if you're interested on being on a subcommittee, which the steering committee would be. It's a subcommittee, right? So if you're here today and you check that box, I'll shoot you an email and we can go from there and see what you're interested in doing.
Perhaps we could send a sign-out sheet around again to make sure everyone's signed in, and then they can check if they're interested in that. Is that right on the podium there, Bruce?
Yeah, we'll even provide a pen.
Normally, someone like myself, anybody else from the department, from the county, we're non-voting members. We're just here advisory for informational purposes. So, if you were taking a vote on something, I wouldn't do that. So I'm just here to provide information and expertise.
So does the steering committee recommendation then go to Rush Lake Watershed Restoration Inc. for final
Yes.
decision?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so that way the full board has input on it. It's just maybe the full board doesn't need to be part of the steering committee.
Because whatever the outcome is from the steering committee, we're applying for another grant as Rush Lake Watershed after the fact. So if we're not on board with something, it doesn't go anywhere. So we all weigh in. Gary?
I just wanted to say, that is a big group. And there was a reason for having a big group before we were what we were, and that was just to get it going. And that seemed to be, I have to honestly say, if we hadn't started it that way, it never would have went anywhere, because there were too many people, and we had a lot of those people, like you just said, weren't necessarily pro, but we needed them too, because you have to dispel that stuff that they're throwing out there, or get them turned around to see the light. So if we had to have a smaller group, every township in here has got 2 members at the least. Some of them have 3. Maybe we could get by with 2, or maybe we could get by with 1 from each. It's just something I'm throwing out there. I'm not saying we have to do that. Sometimes more people have the better job you can do. Sometimes the more people have, the worse job you do, because there's just way too much. Everything takes too long. Nobody agrees. Committee is supposed to be about the worst type of committees. A lot of times, the worst type of governance you can have. You gotta be king.
Yeah.
Bob? It reminds me of when a few of us went up to the Conservation Congress meeting, and that was supposed to be a special committee from trappers, and I think there was 28 people on the committee, and half of them didn't even know where the heck Rush Lake was, let alone what we were accomplishing. And I don't think it's good to have that many people.
Thank you, Bob. Melissa, do you have any remarks on steering committee?
Yes, I do think it should be a smaller group, but I think we need to be very strategic in who we invite to the group, specifically in regards to organizations that are well connected, that have experience with larger grants, because once we make it through this planning phase, we are going to need a bigger pot of money to be able to implement some of these practices. So organizations like Ducks Unlimited, for example, that has a lot of experience managing and administering very large grants, those are the type of organizations that would make sense to be integral to the committee, so that they can help us work through that process. So Fish and Wildlife Service is another great example of an organization that does offer grant support, but then they have a lot of experience managing projects on the ground, so we might look to get someone that has that's part of the NRDA team, or somebody perhaps that works out of the Horicon office that has a lot of experience managing cattails in a similar ecosystem. So those are some of the organizations that I think will be critical to have on this committee.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Kyle, do you have any thoughts? We talked earlier this week of, you have some connections that, you have guest speakers and things like that.
Sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, as far as the an organization that works with diverse groups, Wisconsin Wetlands Association, known throughout the state, their director, Tracy Hames, I spoke with him, I think Tuesday or Wednesday of this week, and he said he would be willing to serve on the steering committee. I've worked with him on other restoration projects, and he has a very diverse background in management and implementation. And I think he would be a pretty valuable member just from his connections perspective and his management outlook.
Thank you. Okay. Brian, you're on the phone. Do you have any thoughts on the steering committee composition?
Yeah, I would just kind of reiterate what Ted, I think, was saying. We want to cover every user group, and I would say with as few people as possible. So if we get too big, it's going to be a cumbersome group to manage. So as few people as possible, but yet covering every user group. So like some folks had mentioned, finding those people who can wear multiple hats as a farmer and a bird watcher or whatever that ends up being. But I think a streamlined committee is going to be much more effective than watching this thing grow too big. So that's and I can also one thing when you talk about Fish and Wildlife Service, if you are looking for, there's a new hire coming on at Fish and Wildlife Service to replace Steve Lenz, who used to be on that committee, I believe. So we might want to wait until that person gets on board before we select that position.
Is there any idea when that person would come on?
You know, I think, I don't know if anyone else there has any other information, but I think it's going to be in the next month or so here.
That sounds good. So where do we go from here? And that question is to the board. For today, I don't know that we need the steering committee off and running necessarily today. We've created the steering committee. We just haven't identified those parties. We want to create that at a future meeting. Our next meeting is April 18th. Do we look to do that then, or is that too asking? Is that too soon, do you think? And I'm asking Brian, Kyle, Melissa, and Ted if 2.5 weeks is enough time to try and get a short list of people for that.
You can do it. It's quick.
Yeah, and like Fish and Wildlife Service, we may not have the person identified, but we could certainly identify the organization and put the feelers out and see who has interest within an organization like that.
Okay.
A question.
Yeah, and I think that's doable. I know the guy who's taking the job, so maybe I could reach out to Fish and Wildlife Service ahead of time and see if I can get a commitment from him prior to him starting the job even. But so we can maybe move that along ahead of schedule as need be.
That'd be great.
I don't know if this complication would be appropriate, but if we have a streamlined steering committee, would there be subcommittees that would have specific representations? Would that be something that we can incrementally put into the steering committee?
We did it before, didn't we?
Just the trappers say, hey, wait a minute, well, look at the fisheries that are not being represented, or the actual fishermen want some kind of input. Is there possibilities of subcommittees that can carry their message to the steering committee? Is that part of the structure?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. And I think the committee would maybe identify that.
Sure.
That would be a way to scratch the itch where maybe there's one individual representing the group, but there's more than just one guy speaking their piece on, what's the interest of trappers or fishermen or whatever.
You could call those work groups.
Yeah, sure.
That'd be work.
Hands-on in the field,
Yeah, there'd be 4, 5,
invasive
6, 7
species.
people that are trying to answer questions, do research, whatever it is.
Okay.
Develop, possible solution.
Okay. So for the April meeting, I'll make it an agenda item to identify the parties on the steering committee. We have a number of individuals who've expressed interest on being on the steering committee. Dr. Kyle Herman, Brian Glinzinski, Melissa, Ted. Kyle talked about Tracy from Wisconsin Wetlands Association. So for the April meeting, what I'll do is compile a list of those who have identified themselves as interested on the steering committee, and then we'll just whittle that down to an acceptable list at that time, leaving placeholders for, we know we want somebody from this group, but we don't have that individual at this time. Does that seem acceptable?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So
We needed a county land and water person also.
Yeah, I would recommend that.
Yeah.
So,
I spoke with Tom Davies of County earlier this last week, letting him know that we were kicking the project off, letting him know that we had an individual from County Land and Water on the last steering committee, and he just wanted to understand the roles a little bit more, and and at least what this sheet says, and I don't know if it's totally on the mark, but our Winnebago County Land and Water Commission guy assisted with maps and data in the last go around. Maybe they did more than that, but it didn't seem like it was that heavy of a commitment.
He did that. The biggest benefit we got from Winnebago County, I thought, was that gal that was here, she was a facilitator.
well, that was UW Extension.
Yes.
Was that Catherine Neislinder?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And because we were such a big group,
Yeah,
she definitely kept it on focus. So we could get something done at a meeting.
right.
And if people were a little bit, she'd explain why we were doing it that way.
Right.
And the UW, I don't know who paid for it, Winnebago County or what. I know that the committee did not pay for it. But she was at most of those meetings, especially once we got going. But it was I thought it was BS. What's she gonna do? But she probably moved that thing, probably got us a year ahead, simply by not everybody sitting around bickering and kicking little things around, It had to have a purpose, or it's not, we don't need it if it doesn't have a purpose. So,
Where the county's really helped me, like for Green Lake and working for Lake Winnebago has been, they help identify practices in the watershed. They'll actually go for additional lake protection grant dollars to do BMPs in the watershed. And they would work with you on that. So they've been extremely instrumental in implementing projects in the watershed. And we're going to need to go there too. So I definitely need to go there. So having them be a partner, is a good thing.
Now, it seems to me like to keep the total number on the steering committee to somewhere in the 10 to 12 area, we're probably not going to have all the directors of Rush Lake Watershed Restoration Inc. on there. So I guess amongst us directors now, what are our thoughts on how to accomplish that? We don't want anybody felt left out, but at the same time, it appears that we may need to reduce the number.
Well, I think we should start off by asking all the members
Okay.
who wants to be a part of this. Maybe not everybody wants to take that on.
Okay.
And I wouldn't think that we should eliminate any of the town appointments. I would think we should try to retain one person from each town, would be my thought.
yeah.
I would think, yeah.
If we don't, we're kind of going against what the charter says.
Yeah. I guess if anyone wants to just contact Brett in the meantime, that's fine. With either their strong desire or their intention that, if I'm not on the steering committee, that's okay.
Yeah, personally, I would think that would be very doable, like for the town of Utica, that if one member that would be, maybe that same person could make everyone, and thus vice versa, at least have one member available to carry it through.
Do we have any idea as far as the number of meetings we're talking about here? Typically, maybe Melissa or Ted have a better idea.
I feel like the committee kind of drives that a little bit. Once we really get into the details, we'll sort of set agendas and figure out, action items and how many meetings are needed. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, it usually starts off with more meetings than not, but then as you get going, then it becomes less and less frequent. Could be monthly and then go to, 3-4 times a year, depends. Issue driven.
Yeah.
maybe my thought is crazy, but go ahead.
That you make a list of the user groups. I'm sure the board has a vast array of expertise on there, and so selecting from those folks that cover the user groups best may be a good way to winnow down how you're represented there. Make sure you got all those bases covered from the people on the board there.
Maybe a dumb question. What's the reason for the steering committee versus just having everybody attend our regular board meetings?
Manageable size, be able to have a constructive dialogue. If you have too many cooks in the kitchen, it gets just muddled. Some people don't get to voice their opinions. There's some people like me that are pretty vocal all the time. Other people, they'll sit back and they have really good thoughts, but they just won't say anything. You want everybody engaged. That's something I see a lot.
It's a more focused group too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And that's the reason, of course, for a little smaller group there also.
Yeah.
Keep it to maybe 10-ish.
Yeah.
Gary?
On the other hand, you got a good point. This committee's been working together for so long, you usually don't have a lot of, all right, Art already said it, there's no point in me sticking my nose in. I mean, adding on to it. I think this group as a whole is kind of like, what should I say, a smaller group? Because we don't all have to talk.
Right.
We see what's going on. If there's something that's really concerned, it comes up. But I know a lot of times we could, these meetings could have been twice as long. But if Bruce has got something to say and I agree with it, what's the point in talking? I don't need to say the same thing.
We have a lot of consensus because we're here to begin with.
Right, and we have people that will bring up something that I didn't see that coming. But
It's up to you guys.
I know. I'm just, it's kind of throwing it out there. That's all.
Sure. We could try a larger group and then.
Brett, I echo Gary's comment as well.
Through the years, we worked together as a group so well that I don't know if it was the DNR, but they actually sent a couple of people down from Madison to sit in on our meetings, trying to figure out why our group was active for all those years. We were better than an anomaly what happened. So, adding a song on that, we did something that normally hasn't happened in the past, our groups.
Okay, so for the next meeting, we'll be establishing the steering committee. If somebody has interest on being on the steering committee from this board, let me know. I'll put you on the list that we're going to pare down or decide on. Same thing with the public. If you check on the sign-in sheet, if you check the subcommittee box, I'll reach out to you and just get an understanding whether you're on the subcommittee, on the steering committee potentially, or a work group that supports the steering committee, and then to any other organizational partners, Stevens Point, Stantec, DNR, county government, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, whoever, putting those names on the list for people who have accepted or would accept the opportunity to contribute to that. That sound like a fair summary of what we'll tackle at the April meeting? Okay. One question from the audience. Yes, sir.
One question. What's the ultimate goal here? What are you shooting for out on the lake?
The prior lake management plan has run its course, and the lake has over 80% coverage of invasive cattail. Invasive cattail has limited benefit for anybody other than cleaner water. The original lake management plan expected that because of our seed bank studies, hardstem bulrush would be the primary regrowth on the lake. That did not happen. We can improve the distribution of vegetation and the types of vegetation. We can also improve habitat by creating more water in places that it's not. and those things could have benefits for wildlife and fish also. But also, that's part of the whole public outreach process, figuring that out. If we have fishermen coming out and saying, hey, I'm not catching perch like I used to before the restoration, what's different today versus then? You know, I believe it's better now than it was in the early 2000s, but that doesn't mean there isn't more work to do. So I would say the obvious goal is less cattail and more other things that we want, but that doesn't mean there aren't other things that we would want to have on that plan too. And that's really up to us and the public, all of us, to figure out. Like what you said, Ted, you get out of it what you put in it. This isn't meant to be a beauty contest of the who's who around Rush Lake looking at each other and being pals. This is meant to be, we work together and deliver an outcome that we all want.
So it's not really a restoration, it's a tune-up. Fix the lake for what you got right now. The lake got restored. The other committee did their job. And they got the lake restored. So now you just want to fine-tune it is what you're basically trying to accomplish.
I want to just add that it's a prairie pothole. It's not actually even a lake designation-wise referred to. Right. But as a prairie pothole, and it's the largest one left east of the Mississippi, that we don't want to lose this one. Because it could turn into a pothole of cattail. Yeah. So with this committee and the intentions, we're trying to bring back the habitat, which brings back the variety of Arctic tern stops here. Let's not lose that one. You know, I mean, different stuff. So that's why we want a variety of people for input. I don't want to see the invasive species, and cattail is not the only one. So we're going to need experts. We're going to need people coming in. So committee to larger, yes.
I'm gonna go to in the back, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I know. Just what you mentioned. I mean, that's the key between Rush Lake, you call it a lake, or it's a prairie pothole. I think you're going to have to come up with a mission statement. I get with that question. It's not restored. It's a lake right now. There's going to be a debate between fishing and hunting, and the redneck grebe that used to be there back when I was in college at Oshkosh with Dr. Strohmeyer and the thing we did. It used to be a prairie pothole. It's not. So I think that's the number one thing, and I agree, I don't want to say too much, but come up with a mission statement. Are you going to make it a prairie pothole, or are you going to make it a lake? And right now it's a lake, and that's just something we're struggling with, is the depth of the water. It's going to have to be drained. It's going to have to be a drought. To be a prairie pothole, you have to have long-term droughts. That's it. I mean, I don't know what the biologists say, but when I was working at Oshkosh with that was Dr. Strohmeyer and the key, and he never won that battle, but maybe he's a guy that's a bad word around here. I don't know, but I wish that would come back to that. But he kept debating that. Are we going to make this a prairie pothole, or are we going to make it a lake, and the water levels? So, again, that's a tough decision by the committee to make. What's your mission statement? You're going to have that. You're going to have no direction from there.
Yeah, and just to answer that, our mission statement was developed before we were incorporated as a nonprofit organization. It's right here. Then the Rush Lake Steering Committee is dedicated to implementing a practical plan that allows Rush Lake, its affiliated streams, and connected wetlands to achieve their full recreational, aesthetic, and wildlife potentials for the mutual benefit of those who live, work, study, and recreate in the watershed. So I'd say achieve their full recreational, aesthetic, and wildlife potentials. I'd say that's what we're after, but that's inherently subjective. So
wide vision there.
Yeah, in front.
The definition of a prairie pothole, the water doesn't exit the prairie pothole, and you've got to exit. I never see so much water go out of there because you've got it lower. That's what Devil's Lake is a prairie pothole. It keeps getting bigger, and farms go and disappear. And that is a prairie pothole. Rush Lake is a lake. It's not a prairie pothole.
Thank you. There was another hand I saw. Yes, please.
Yeah, I just echo what the gentleman back here said. Basically, we don't want to get bogged down in a bunch of organization, okay? But we've got to have a specific mission statement. And right now, the doctors aren't happy. Maybe other people aren't happy. But sometimes you can't please everybody. That's just the way life is.
And if the cattails are a problem, let's address it. Let's get on with the show. You know, and the other thing is the lake is too high, okay? And the original plan worked, but it didn't work so well. So own it, okay? We can talk about steering committees, we can talk about, the directors actually aren't, the steering committee, these people are the parts of the directors, and you ultimately decide. I think you should keep the two separate, but you want a steering committee that's very narrow, okay? And has a specific mission, okay? And the water is nice, okay, that's great. You know, recreation, you can have water skiers up there. But do something specific, okay? That's what I think the public wants, okay? Is the lake too high right now? Yes, I think so. Is the water clean? Yes. Is there runoff from the farms? I don't know. Okay? That I certainly would test for that. But how do you get rid of those cattails? They weren't part of the original plan. They're there now. Let's get rid of them and replace them with something that wildlife likes. So that's what I got to say.
Here, Art, you had your hand up before. I'll give you a chance, and then I'll come to you, Ted.
Okay, there's a couple things here. Is we were talking about Dr. Strohmeyer. I saw him one time in Berlin at the Century Store when there was one yet. And when we were going to do this drawdown and everything and that, the one thing that was in the back of his mind is he did have a concern about what would happen if we got too many cattails, which is what we have. The thing is with the cattails, if we want to get rid of the cattails, we have good water now. I'm certain any of you who were there before we did the drawdown would agree that Rush Lake was pretty near a cesspool. And the thing is we have the cattails. Well, one reason we have that abundance of cattails is because there is nutrient loading, and what it's doing is the cattails are drawing those nutrients out. So if we get rid of the cattails, what is that going to do to our water quality? These are all questions that are involved with this. You know, it's not a simple thing. That's why they have to do this research in that to see what the ramifications of this stuff is. You know, it's not simple. And you know, the reason that the water is high is because a few years ago we wanted to see if we could go and get improved muskrat grazing out on the cattails and that stuff with having a little bit higher water level there. You know, that's pretty near to the end of its life cycle too, as far as that experiment is concerned. The DNR did flyovers to see whether or not, you know, how many muskrat houses were out there, aerial surveys and that kinds of stuff. That's all part of what's going to be happening with this project. But it's not a simple thing and just, well, you know, yeah, we wanted to see a lot of hard stem bulrush back and it didn't happen. And, you know, now what do we do next? That's what this is all about.
Ted?
This grants for a comprehensive lake management plan, right? So it's going to look at everything comprehensively, and you're right, it's not a simple thing. At the end of the day, when this plan is finished and approved by the department, everyone's going to have a say in what goes into it. There's going to be goals for water quality, goals for habitat. You don't have to go into what a drawdown, even if none of the drawdown ever happens, you're going to have to talk about those things and what it would entail. And that's also going to leverage, once that plan's approved, more monies to do these things, whether it's improvements in the watershed or to treat cattails or try to implement or plant bulrush or whatever. So, and Tony Evers, the governor, put another $1 million into protection grant monies. So there's going to be a lot more money available, and then the state monies will help leverage for federal monies. So, but you have to have that plan to be eligible for those monies. So, again, you know, go ahead. Oh, I
No. I didn't have a question. I had a comment.
It's not a simple thing, and a lot's already been done. And part of the plan is to summarize everything that's been done. To get that in one place, you know, because right now it's spread out in a bunch of different documents, right? So.
Sure.
I'm not suggesting it's a simple thing. All I'm saying is, if I was going to run a bar, okay, I wouldn't sit there and argue You know, you got a bunch of people arguing about what should we cover the seats with, okay? Should it be vinyl or what? Just get a bunch of people and get them in the bar, and I won't use the expression, get them in the bar. I think there is some urgency that has to be sought here. We can talk and talk, but we've got to get going, okay? And I agree, it's not simple. But let's come up with a plan, and at least I think what the public wants and what I want to see is specific dialogue, not talk about steering committees, who's on it, and so on and so forth. I know this is going to cost money. But let's cover the seats with, I won't say the word, okay, with people that are going to drink beer and liquor, okay? So, it's an old joke, but let's get it going, okay? I see some urgency, I understand it's going to take money, I understand. But how do we correct the problem? Let's get the plan. Isn't that what we're really after here? Totally. Okay.
Ron?
Well, I often like to talk about money. And, you know, it's going to take a lot of money to do the things out there that may need to be done. And it's frustrating because we're going to go through this first year. We're going to do a lot of measuring. We're going to do a lot of analyzing. And the $25,000 grant, you know, takes care of that. But the stepping stones after that will be, as I understand it, to larger grants, hopefully. And that's where the money's going to come from. So right now, we have to do this planning and measuring aspect for the next year or two so we can get more money. I don't think we would be able, and I guess to get the approval of the appropriate government regulatory agencies to get rid of the damn cattails. That's what it seems like we're after here. This is the road that we have to go down.
It's not about just doing something, it's doing the right
Yep,
thing.
here, wait. Brian?
I'm going to have to step off here in a second, but I just wanted to say thanks again, and you know, to some of that discussion, you know, we are actively managing Rush Lake, and you know, we're going to be spraying cattails this fall. So this is like I think Bruce was just saying. He said it perfect. We need a good long-term plan in place. We're not gonna wait for that plan to be in place to manage cattail, but that long-term plan will guide us better than the current plan, and make a lot of those grants available to us. So, thanks, great work. Looking forward to working with you guys, and have a great weekend. We'll see y'all later.
All right, thank you, Brian. Appreciate you calling in today. Yes, please, Nancy.
Just a little reminder from all the meetings that I have attended through the last few years with all of this going on, is that to get to where we are today, there had to be a lot of discussion. And how do you manage, the cattail thing is a huge difference. It's a huge deal. How do you take care of that without possibly negatively affecting other things on the lake? Rush Lake is its own worst enemy. Is how I look at it. We don't have anything that we can work off of.
What's that?
It's my understanding from other projects that have been done. Rush Lake is already, and trying to take care of the multiple issues that there are for the trappers, for the duck, for the fish, for the cattail, is trying to assess all of it and come together. We turn around and spray. That's great. What do you spray so that it doesn't negatively affect other things and tick off other people? Well, now we can't fish, but we took care of the cattails. Okay, we're trying to make everybody happy, trying to get it all together. Is that my understanding, right? So there's a lot here to look at. And this is why we're here today, and we've gotten to this point now, which is great because we didn't have anything else prior to this. It was like, okay, who can come up with something? This is what was presented and was like, we don't have any other plan to go with. Let's shoot for it. What do we have to lose? We don't.
I want to wrap up this section of the meeting, and finish it up here at the front table. Kyle, would you?
Yeah. I think from my perspective, being a part of the steering committee, is I want to figure out the overall outcome of what you want the Rush Lake system to be. And if that is, from what I hear, it sounds like it's a hemi-marsh. So a hemi-marsh is kind of a transient state that you see in prairie potholes where you've got a mix of native vegetation and open water. It's going to provide as much user value to a variety of different people as possible. Now the problem with a hemi-marsh having that open mix is that when you've got an inlet outlet like you have, which most prairie potholes get meltwater, they tend to be small. This is a large example of a pothole wetland. And if you have an inlet outlet, you're going to have to actively manage to maintain a hemi-marsh, which means water levels will have to be manipulated, and you will have to do vegetation management. And it's not going to be pretty for a while. I envision the cattail fight is going to take a while, but it can be done. You can drown out cattail, and you can get native vegetation back. But I think identifying what the end goal is going to be pretty crucial, because it's going to take a while to get there, and it's going to take some more implementation of water level management.
Real quick, I don't want to be biting, but do you think there's going to be a conflict between fishermen and duck hunter, correct?
No. It doesn't have to.
I just want to address that. I don't know where we're going to come from.
It doesn't have to be. I mean, if you can keep the center portion of the lake where you probably got the old channel moving through, it should stay deep enough to drown out any of the emergent plants, and you should be able to maintain a modest fisheries.
Okay. That's
Probably not going to be massive, because you're going to have to, it's going to be a give and take. But you can satisfy and scratch probably everybody's itch with it. It's a large enough system.
That's perfect. Thank you. That's all I want to hear. That was well said.
So my intent is to listen to you guys and figure out what you want to see out of it, and then come up with a sustainable management plan moving forward. And it's going to be active. It's going to be, every maybe 3 to 5 years, you're probably going to have to come in and manage the system to try and maintain the vegetation in this state. Because normally a pothole will cycle through. You'll have wet times, you'll have dry times. And unfortunately in this scenario, the hydrology is a little altered with your inlet outlet and your dam system. So we're going to have to help manage it along, and I want to come up with a sustainable management plan for it.
Thank you, Kyle. Ted or Melissa, do you have anything else to add on this part?
Other than I think this is great dialogue, and I hope we have a lot more of it.
Okay. Ted?
No, I've said quite a lot. If anybody has questions.
Okay. I'd love to stay on this right now. If we are going to have a hard stop at 11 o'clock to not eat too much weekend, but if there's time at the end of the meeting, we can revisit what would we like to see, and if nothing else, we'll have a meeting in a couple weeks to spend with each other. So with that, I'm going to move on to the work stream determination. Everybody, all the directors have received this document in your board packets that I've given to you, and I've also given these out to the audience. These, there's a goal. There's 5 goals for this first phase of the planning grant, and underneath each goal, there's a sub goal, which for readability standpoint, I've simplified into a more concise wording on this. And for the sake of helping us understand what does this first phase of the project look like and what are we going for, the purpose of this part of the meeting is to get it out in the open that this is what we envisioned in our phase 1 grant application, and to determine any needs that we need from a support standpoint, whether that's on the steering committee, whether that's work groups that feed into the steering committee, and to help us shape the direction that we'll be taking in the coming months, because it'll be the 4th of July before you know it. So I want to begin on this. The first goal of the planning grant was to enhance public awareness of the impact of invasive species on Rush Lake ecosystems by developing a community-focused educational material and programming. That is not simplified. That is our stated goal from the grant application. So within there, the first one was developing educational pamphlets, mailers, and postcards. That was something that Stantec is in their proposal that they're going to be assisting us with the development of that. There was no other extra work identified in that. So I would say the owner of that one would be Stantec. Is that fair, Melissa? That between Stantec and we should have what we need. Do we need a work group to help support that?
Well, I think the committee can help that, and to some of the audience's points where we need to have that mission statement of the committee, I see, how we talk about this project really being informed by some of the decisions the committee is making. So I think, the first thing we're going to do on day one probably isn't develop a pamphlet, because I think we need to kind of frame what this project is and be able to frame it in a way that makes sense to everybody. So I think it'll be more input than just Stantec needs to be.
Right. Is that something that we determine on the fly as the project's developing and develop that over the summer months, do you think?
Yeah, I would say in the next couple months, I think we need to have something available that we can provide to the public, because on your number 2, we do have where we're going to be soliciting public input. So I would like something for the public to react to in advance of going out there and getting soliciting as much input as we can.
Okay. So from a committee, do you mean committee Rush Lake Watershed Restoration Inc., steering committee, or work group?
Yeah, I think one of the first couple meetings we have with the steering committee, we should discuss what information we want to put into a pamphlet, a mailer.
Okay. So the steering committee can hold on to that one after we identify those project goals when we get started. Okay. Any comments, board? No? We'll keep it moving. The second item under goal 1 is organizing and host a field day at Rush Lake and its watershed. We had a field day last year for trustees from the NRDA where we took them out on the east side of the lake, showed them the lake. That seems like a very straightforward type event that we wouldn't need anything other than a couple of volunteers to speak at the field day, and as far as setting a date and stuff like that goes, just leave that to the steering committee. That seem.
Yeah, and I sort of envision that field day could go hand in hand with like an open house, for example. So, if we host an event here, if we find that it's big enough where people can come and learn about the project, then as an option they could go take a tour of Rush Lake. Or there could be some, public vantage points where the public can gather and we can talk about what the lake is. I don't envision, bringing people en masse on the lake. It would be logistically challenging, but I think there's vantage points where we can see the lake and talk about issues that we can readily see from land.
Okay. But as far as needs for that today, having a specific work group or anything beyond the steering committee, you don't see a need on that?
No, I think the steering committee could probably identify, members that could help to organize that.
Okay. Anybody have any objections to that approach? No? Okay. And the final item under goal number 1, participate in a public presentation at a professional conference or local conservation group. That seems a much smaller after the fact kind of thing that we would do later in the calendar year.
Yep.
Last year I spoke at Southwoods Park Association's annual dinner, so whether it's local like that or more broad, we'd figure that out after a while. Okay, no other questions on 1. We're largely going to be deferring to the steering committee to help direct the development of those items and have them put forth a good public outreach. Okay, I don't see any reason for pause there. Goal number 2, seeking public involvement through all phases of the project, which in the first one, including an informational open house to solicit input and update the public. Just like what you said before, Melissa, you think? Steering committee tease that up and get it scheduled? Okay. The next one, conducting a 3-part public survey development, data collection, data analysis. Ted, I want to ask you first about that. What do you see on that? Because the survey, we need to come up with the questions, right? I mean, we, like somebody here. Those questions need to get approved by DNR central office. So the way I understand it, they give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the questions that we identified?
Well, not so much that. They'll help you if they want to make sure that the questions aren't leading who's ever doing the questionnaire to a specific answer. So they'll look at it and they'll take what you have. They don't want to get rid of anything that you have. They'll maybe modify it so that it's not adding any kind of bias. So they'll just help you. So I mean, I've never seen questions really necessarily get thrown out so much. It's just be modified.
But they aren't going to write the questionnaire for us.
No, we're going to write the questionnaire. They can help.
Who is we? Like you and I, we spoke on the phone the other day, and I mentioned Puckaway's lake management plan. They just got done with that, and they had a survey that went along with that. How did they construct their questions in that planning process?
I was a consultant, myself a little bit, but I'm more so the consultant in the Lake District.
Yeah.
And I think we can, people do this, so we can gather, what other lakes have done.
I can give you their questions if you want them.
So is that something that we leave with the steering committee too, or do we need a specific survey work group of people to come up with those questions?
No, I think Stantec could maybe lead framing up what some of those questions are with maybe some examples, and then the steering committee can maybe comment on them. I don't think it has to be an elaborate process.
Are you envisioning multiple questionnaires going out to the public, on different topics, or are you going to have one broad questionnaire?
We did budget it such that it was just one broad.
That's preferable. I think people would rather have one than do multiple ones.
Yeah.
So.
And we did budget it to do some electronic surveys, and then as needed, do paper copies, because we understand that, some of the folks may not have computers.
And that seems pretty customary. Puckaway did it that way, I think, right?
They also had local gas stations, that sort of thing. They'd have a box with some of the surveys there and announce it on their website or other ways, even in the paper, that you could get a questionnaire at whatever Citgo and pull it out and then just mail it back, or there can even be
a deposit box. So that's strictly on a local level then, or?
We want to reach as many people as we can, any stakeholders for Rush Lake. Even if, someone from Illinois that comes up here and duck hunts once a year, or used to duck on here, if they wanted to comment, their comments are valuable.
And certainly landowners, and probably in the whole watershed, whatever,
The more the merrier, honestly. That's the goal, is to reach as many people as we can. So.
Okay. But the moral of the story is for today, we're okay with that being on the steering committee's action list once we launch it. Okay. 2C is assemble the planning committee of stakeholders, agencies, and other interested parties. We kicked that off at the last agenda item here, and we're going to revisit that in April, so we're on our way on that one. And the last one there is identify and establish roles and responsibilities for the project partners and committee members, which that'll go hand in hand with creating that steering committee, right? Okay. Any other questions or remarks on goal number 2 in the grant project? No? Okay. Goal number 3, understanding the abundance, understanding the abundance and distribution of submergent and emergent plant populations. Aquatic plant surveys were performed in 2005, which was before the drawdown, and in 2008 after the drawdown. Significant changes include the decrease in open water and bulrush acreages, and increases in cattail acreages were notable between 2005 and 2008. Surveys are needed to document the changes since 2008. Survey methodology will follow DNR guidelines and be similar to the 2008 survey where boat access is feasible. Modified survey approach is proposed for areas with boat access constraints. The aquatic plant inventory is the one sub-goal, which would characterize submergent and emergent plant communities. And that one, we have to select a partner. We'll hopefully be doing that in April. I have the request for proposals out to 2 agencies. And once we have that partner selected, we'll get them on board and have them off and running and completing that this summer. Ted?
Well, the point intercept survey where you can get to, right? And then we did a study on the Lake Winnebago system, the entire Lake Winnebago system, all the pool lakes and Winnebago proper, using we use the Minnesota method to characterize the emergent floating leaf plant communities, but there are areas that were so dense we couldn't get in there. And Winnebago County has a drone that has GPS capabilities, and that was a fantastic way to do these areas we couldn't get into, because you'd fly a bay, and I can literally zoom in and I can tell what the species are, and I can draw a circle around them and know it's 0.8 acres of lotus or something. So we were able to finish off those areas and really characterize these dense plant beds. So that might be something to look into, because maybe it is all narrow-leaf cattail, but I wouldn't be surprised if you found some other species, higher value species mixed in places that you could identify.
Yeah, and I'd also just like to comment, I'd like to be a little strategic if possible about the drone use, and maybe, and that's great that Winnebago County has one, and hopefully they can partner with us on that. One of the issues is identifying non-native Phragmites on this lake system. There is an awful lot of native Phragmites, but I do see non-native encroaching in, and there's about a 3-week window of time in the fall where the native Phragmites dies back, but the non-native is still really green. So if we can fly a drone at that time, on transects across the lake, we could probably pretty easily identify where some of those non-native species are coming in. So I'd like that to, be part of this discussion of how we map non-accessible areas.
I can't volunteer Winnebago County.
I know you can't.
Yeah,
I just wanted to bring it up that it was a really powerful tool.
Is that county land and water?
Yeah.
Ted? Okay, so that's I'll have a
steering committee anyways.
Yeah. Well, hopefully I'm on the steering committee. So, so that's a great comment, Ted. Thank you. Okay. Anything else on the plant survey? Otherwise, between our partner and hopefully some support from county, we can get that one taken care of. Okay. We'll move on to the second and last page of the goals for Goal 4. Continue water quality sampling within the lake and associated tributaries, and perform GIS mapping to determine surface water contribution to the lake to estimate non-point pollution loading. The primary objective of water quality monitoring is to increase the public's understanding of watersheds and how human land use impacts stream and lake water quality, while building a baseline data set of basic water quality information. Water quality sampling was performed in 2002, 2003, 2005, 2016, 17, and 18. Continual monitoring through the planning and implementation phases of this project will be critical to document changes in water quality parameters over time. So the Goal 4A, measure water clarity and temperature and collect water samples for analysis by the State Lab of Hygiene. That one, I'm identifying myself as the owner. The past 2 years, I've been collecting lake samples on Rush Lake, and last year was the first year that we collected tributary samples into Rush Lake. This year we had originally scoped out 2 lake sites and 6 tributary sites, but the only named tributary is Henderson Creek. The other ones are largely just drainage ditches into the lake that don't have a ton of water in them, but still are an important part of water coming into Rush Lake. So I have what I need for that one. I'm going to be getting supplies from the State Lab of Hygiene and often testing, perhaps in April, but certainly by May. Also, we have included 6 months of stream sampling, and also 2 event-based samples. So if there's a significant rainfall, we get 3 inches of rain and everything's flooding and water's running off the fields and sheets, I'll be out there collecting those anomaly samples, if you will, on 2 cases. So we've got plenty of samples accounted for. Any remarks on water sampling? If not, we'll move on to the next one. Estimate non-point pollutant loading through GIS mapping. Most of that was something that Stantec had scoped out for a service that we'd be contracting you for. I wonder if there's anything else that you need beyond your own capabilities, because that seems like it's firmly in Stantec's court.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there is potentially an opportunity for the DNR to help support some of this. So this may be kind of an evolving task depending on some of the interest within the department.
Okay. And these 2 topics here, I don't envision there's a lot of involvement for the steering committee other than, okay, the year's over, what did the water quality look like, and building that into what we need to do for phase 2 of the the planning project in 2020, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's it for goal 4 and what we've identified in the plan. Kevin? Kevin?
Yeah.
Final goal is number 5, conducting studies to determine the seed bank composition, phosphorus content, and availability of lead shot, acquire recent aerial imagery to assess site conditions and wildlife use. Rush Lake Watershed Restoration will partner with University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point to collect soil sediment samples, perform a seed bank analysis, and determine amount of the lead in the samples collected. UW-Stevens Point will hire a student employee during the 2019 summer season to sample and analyze the sediments. This effort is expected to take approximately a month and a half. Seed bank studies in 1993 indicated the seed bank on average was 68% hard stem bulrush. Regrowth following the 2-year drawdown was expected to mirror that. Unfortunately, the quantifiable acreage of hard stem bulrush in 2008 approximated pre-drawdown amounts, and 59% of the point intercept locations, 462 of them, could not be reached due to non-navigable dense cattail beds. So, Kyle, I think this one falls largely on you and your team for A, determining the active seed bank, phosphorus, and presence of lead shot in the sediments. And so that one, where we left off, the sediments for phosphorus, that's going to be tested at the State Lab of Hygiene. I have an account. I'd coordinate getting that stuff down there for their testing. But the other pieces, you've got people to collect the samples.
Yeah, we'll have to work on logistics as far as getting boat access and that kind of stuff. But I imagine as we get closer to summer, we can start to work on that.
Okay. As far as getting the work done to do it, is that all something that UW-Stevens Point would be able to handle, the recruiting of the students, paying of the students where it occurs and whatnot?
Yeah, that'll be an in-kind contribution. We'll have a summer employee work under me, and I'll have him or her out on the lake pulling samples, sifting through them, looking for lead. We'll pull a couple intact cores, and we have a wet germination technique, and over a couple months we can see actually what comes out of the seed bank voluntarily. So we'll be able to do that at some sort of transect location so that we can get a nice quantifiable estimate of what's where in your seed bank.
And I don't remember the number offhand, but you were anticipating taking like 80-some cores.
Yeah, so we would do probably something like 80 to 90 cores for phosphorus analysis to get you a good representation of where phosphorus is being buried. That's probably going to be something we'll have to work on because you can cut off the inlet of water. You can improve your water quality, but unfortunately phosphorus sticks around a long time in a lake system, particularly a dammed lake system. So when all that phosphorus comes in, it buries in the sediments, and it can kind of rear its ugly head for a while. So we'll want to take a look at that phosphorus and potentially plan out in the near future, a couple of years down the road, to reanalyze it and see if you're flushing it out of your system or not. Because there's two things that have to happen. You got to take care of the lake, but then you also have to take care of your incoming phosphorus loads, which is probably going to be contributing to changes in your vegetation. So that one in particular, I wanted to do up to about 90 samples for that. As far as the lead shot and the seed bank, we'd probably split it and do 40. Just from a logistics standpoint, doing seed bank analysis, you have to have a pan of sediment for each location. If I had 90 of them, I think I'd have to steal the entire greenhouse from the university, and I don't think they'd let me do that. But we could get through probably 40 of them for you for sure.
Okay.
Are you talking about lead?
Well, lead will go through at probably 40 locations as well, and we'll sieve the top 10 centimeters, and we'll be looking for noticeable materials above, I forget what size class. We'll do something like 0.5 millimeter, and we'll catch whatever we can from a lead shot perspective.
The University over at Ripon have done lots of studies on that, on lead that's in the lake through Dr. Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Brooks worked with us.
Okay.
We discovered a way to take the lead and drive it down in, keep it away from ducks and geese and whatever you might have. Dr. Stonemeyer worked with me and did testing out there. That we had a 1-foot box with this deep clamp and was checking the top, basically the top foot of the material.
Yeah.
A lot of lead there.
Okay. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to repeat it and see are we still catching any lead in the top rooting area for ducks?
Yeah, I'd like to work with you on that.
Sure.
I have quite a bit of experience on that.
Yeah. Doug was on the lead subcommittee from the original lake management plan. So, Doug, if you do that, that sounds great. And if you could, please, I bet you have the old reports from Brooks and Strohmeyer around. If you could run those down so that we can close the gap between what the case was almost 20 years ago and what it is today, that can really help us understand the direction that's going.
So are we going to use the same, most of the same points that we used for collection the last time, or different points?
I don't know where those points were, so my hope is that in the studies that Doug can unearth.
I mean, in phosphorus and not lead.
We didn't do phosphorus in the lake sediment.
I mean, some of the sampling. Talks about some of the sampling.
For the water sampling, I'm doing all the same sites as before.
So some of the phosphorus will overlay on top of the lead in the seed bank analysis as well. It's just that I can't do all 90 of those samples from about half it to every other point transaction and pull information on that. So you'll get combinations where you'll have lead, phosphorus, and seed bank.
Right.
And if we can overlay them with previous sampling, if we can get information, we'll get as close as we can. That'd be great.
Okay. All right. So that one, Kyle, really glad to have you on the team and being able to run with that. It'll be a huge help to the project and help us deliver results long term. And then the last item that we had identified in our grant and our planning project is data analysis to determine the number of potential muskrat lodges. That was one that Stantec is helping us with. They've got an item in there. I have received flyover imagery from the DNR from this past winter, and I also have flyover imagery from a number of other winters as well. Art said it before. We had an issue with muskrat populations on the lake between heavy trapping and a drought that occurred in 2012. And we did this trial water level regime where we look to keep it higher. This is the last year of that trial throughout the growing season to help muskrat access areas of the lake that they may have been frozen out of due to the drought. So that one, Melissa, I think that one's, once we sign the contract, that's pretty much somebody at Stantec can run and get that one done.
I don't know that I received the imagery from you yet.
I haven't provided it.
Okay, so whenever we get the contract and I get the imagery, we'll figure out how that imagery looks, and if we can package it, put it all together in an easy way, that'll be the first step.
Okay. So that entails all of the goals from our planning project, phase 1. There's a number of things we've talked about here. Water levels, what do you do with that? And, that's not addressed in this part of the project. We're in measure and data gather part. I envision that's certainly going to be part of our phase 2 of the project for creating that regime that supports the long-term health of the lake. So this is just that starting point. And, Ted, we talked about it before with planning grants. You could apply for one grant and you can apply for a phase 2 next year, or you could say, we're going to apply for both phases this year and have 2 sort of separate projects going. But the way we kind of viewed it was walk before you run. Let's just ease into it, start collecting some data, and we don't bite off more than we can chew too quickly from a plan standpoint. And where we left off on prior conversations is from a data collection standpoint, if we do our homework right this year, it'll dovetail into things like what Brian said. We're not going to wait for a final plan to be developed in several years from now. We could probably get the ball rolling on some control of the cattail before the plan is quote unquote final in a couple of years. So we would still look for opportunities to achieve things in the lake before that point. Does that sound like a fair characterization?
Yeah, I guess just add the caveat that controlling cattail isn't to eliminate emergent plants. It's just to shift them back to bulrush or other more desirable species, right? So that's kind of the pilot projects. We're going to try to find a way to select for native species. I guess is the way I put
Okay. Does anybody have any other remarks on the work streams that we have for phase 1 of the grant, of our lake management plan development? We'll be developing a brand new set of goals for 2020 in conjunction with our grant application for a 2020 large-scale phase 2 lake management planning grant. So to anybody in the audience or on this board, if there's things that you didn't see here that you really want to see, those are all things that input helps us develop that second phase grant application and really help us achieve the most from this planning process. So look forward to working with everybody to develop that. Okay, if nothing further on the Lake Management Plan workstream determination, I do have an other matters section, which should be pretty short, and then we'll see if we got a couple minutes left for additional comment. Other matters. Todd and I submitted a recommendation to all directors on insurance for Rush Lake Watershed. Todd, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the insurance section, Todd and I, we went out and we met with Mayville Insurance and Diedrich Insurance in Ripon. In short, we're recommending acquiring director and officer and general liability policies from Mayville Insurance. That recommendation is based on in-person meetings, phone calls, and email correspondence with both. We gave both a pretty uniform shot. We asked the same questions of both. The policies were largely the same, and we've recommended Mayville Insurance for the reasons that we identified on the memo that I sent out the prior week. Pricing wasn't all that difference, and in the interest of keeping things moving, I'm going to make a motion to acquire director and officer and general liability insurance policies from Mayville Insurance at a cost not to exceed $950. I am motioning that.
Second.
Art seconds that. Before we vote, is there any debate or discussion on that motion?
At what level of insurance is that amount?
The amount is $1 million, but it's in the recommendation that don't think of it as an amount, as a payout. We view it as a prepaid legal, because whatever the amount is, the insurer has a duty to defend, which helps keep us on task on the project, as opposed to having to go out, hire a lawyer, pay a lawyer, hope we have enough money to pay the lawyer, and then win the suit. Because, at prior meetings we talked, what risk is there to Rush Lake? What's gonna happen to us? We're a nonprofit. We're not really doing a lot. We're doing this project, and it's a $30,000 project, so that sounds like a lot, but not to sell it short. It's kind of a book report. We're doing a book report that hopefully we'll use to make Rush Lake a lot better over the long run. So really, what risk is there to Rush Lake? So, and I agree, and Todd and I agree, but the risk is that somebody files a lawsuit against us, and we get bogged down, and it distracts us from the issue at hand. So it's called insurance for a reason. It's insurance to help protect us from the unthinkable that happens. So we're probably not paying out the $1 million. We're probably paying out $0. It's the duty to defend that we really get. Any other questions or debate on the motion?
I imagine that was $900 a year.
That's an annual premium that's there. The rate that we have from West Bend is their policy minimum, but that would likely be reduced to the number that Brad, Mr. Steinbach from Mayville Insurance, floated to us last fall once we submit the intention to acquire it.
Do we get to keep that rate for X amount of years, or is it just for this year and then next year we got to revisit it again?
In meeting with Brad and Diedrich, they work the same day. When at renewal time, you update them in regard to your assets, your number of members and whatnot, and then they come back with a new rate.
Okay.
Just from working on that side and the insurance, when I was at Alliance, it's pretty typical. You sometimes get like a 3-year rate, but I haven't seen much more than that. And after the 3 years, you get you get 3 times the surprise as opposed to just 1 time the surprise.
Right.
So it's just an annual number, and we would have this discussion again next year at renewal time.
Okay.
I'd just like to comment that I think the recommendation, the memo here from Brett and Todd was very well done, and I'm certainly in favor of it.
Okay. Any other comments, debate from the board before we vote?
Call for the question.
Okay. So the motion is to acquire director and officer and general liability insurance from Mayville Insurance at a cost not to exceed $950. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Todd. Opposed? There are none opposed. Are there any that have abstained?
I abstain.
Kevin abstained. Okay, so we have all in favor, except Kevin who abstained. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, thank you. I'll be in contact with Mayville Insurance and get the ball rolling on that. Todd and I will work to make the payment and get the insurance in effect immediately, which is retroactive towards when we first spoke with them. But okay, next general meeting is Thursday, April 18th at 7 p.m. here at the Nepieskin Town Hall. That meeting is going to have a full slate, and I think the challenge with that meeting is going to be keeping it to a manageable amount of time. We do have board member elections. The towns have been nominating individuals for the directorships. We also do have an open at-large position on the board. So if anybody is interested in being a director of Rush Lake Watershed, if you check the director box on the sign-in sheet, I can follow up with you on that and figure out how we go about getting you considered for a board position. Second, after we figure out board members, we'll also be electing officers for the next year. Review of prior minutes, treasurer's report. The establishment of the individuals on the steering committee is probably going to be the biggest item on that meeting agenda. There won't be a lot otherwise from a lake management planning project standpoint, because we just won't do that much otherwise other than focus on creating that steering committee. An opportunity that we have for a meeting, and I don't know if this is the one, is we've met with John Kellerman at Fox Valley Tech before to talk about the possibilities of burning on Rush Lake. And that's one thing where, Melissa, we were kicking tires on the possibility of applying for, I don't know if it was a PR grant this last year for burning on Rush Lake. And the punchline on that initiative was because of a number of uncertainties on how to conduct a burn on Rush Lake, primarily imposed because of changes in some administrative procedures at the DNR. Wildlife used to burn. Burning's all held within forestry now. How do you get the proper approvals in place? And that was all things that we didn't have an answer to when we were looking at applying for that grant. So for a future meeting, I'd love to have John Kellerman here from Fox Valley Tech to speak to us about the opportunity on the lake. Burning is one of the tools in the arsenal that lots of places are using to help manage cattail. And, having a candid conversation between him and us and seeing what we might be able to do, whether it's at the end of the plan to burn or if we could do something before then, would really be the point of that conversation. I don't know that the April meeting, I think we've got more than enough at that one, and I don't know of John's availability, so I guess I would table that for another.
I would table it, and we need to circle back with Rachel. So Rachel Brookings from DNR, she was the point person for us to get information about what a burn at Rush Lake would look like. So Steve Easterly, who used to manage the lake, did develop a burn plan, so that was provided to Rachel. She was going to run that burn plan up the chain of command to see how DNR felt about it, and I haven't heard back from Rachel on that. So first thing is we should just circle back with her and see where she left off with the forestry folks.
Okay. So Melissa, between you and I, we'll circle back with Rachel, and then maybe what I do is gauge John Kellerman's availability for a summer meeting to come and speak with us. Do you think? And
yeah, and I think it has to be more than just Fox Valley. Stevens Point, was interested. Stantec certainly could support. So I think it's a big group of people that would likely have to be involved, given the logistics of the burn. So maybe it's something the steering committee could address too.
Yeah, I think. Well, I just don't want to delegate things like that entirely to the steering committee, because it's, having a guy like that, I could talk all day about. I talked to John Kellerman, I talked to Kyle Herman, I talked to all these people, but I really want this board and the public to hear these people too, to help us think through what we're doing.
Well, I think the steering committee will talk about the control of cattail. There's a lot of different options to control cattail and knock it back, but you also have to have water manipulations tied behind it, and if you have one without the other, you're wasting your time. So if you don't get the plan in place that talks about how the long scale management is going to work, I wouldn't act by just getting rid of your cattail. If you burn cattail and you put water back on at a moderate level, the cattail is going to come back with a vengeance. And so you really have to have all the links made before you start down that pathway.
Yeah, and I think the reason for talking to Rachel was just to see what could be done with respect to burning, because those are conversations that take a long time.
Yes, I would agree with that with DNR right now and the regulations on burning. It is not a simple, you cannot get a burn on the ground within a couple weeks. Burn plans take a long time to develop, and then the conditions, particularly in a wetland burn, are very minimal. You might have a 2 or 3 week window to get a burn on the ground.
And I think DNR is going to be really concerned about, public input on the burn, and so I figured when we were doing this public outreach this summer, burning would be part of that. We would talk about what that would look like, where it would occur, whose properties would it be on, that sort of stuff.
So should I just not touch base with John about a potential summer meeting? Am I putting the cart ahead of the horse there?
Potentially.
Okay, so I'll sit tight. Or
speaking of burning, all the burning that they do on E-Line, is that something that we can draw from?
Potentially Fish and Wildlife Service would be interested in helping with that. They've got their own policy and process and staff, so merging the two, it may not work out to have them support us, because we might be in a different timeline. They typically do their burns fall and spring.
Well, federal doesn't mean state.
Right. So, they're their own operating unit.
But they've got the experience.
They do have the experience, and they may want to partner with us. We just don't know that.
Well, they might not actually be able to burn on state property. DNR is in such a flux right now with burn, and so finding the right credentialed person to boss a burn on DNR property it's a unicorn right now.
So we just need to take the governor out to dinner? Does that take?
Can't give that a try.
Steering committee. I think the big thing is, though, Fish and Wildlife may be able to give us their experiences of what they've had for results from doing all this burning, which Steve has talked about that once or twice when he's been here about, you don't get rid of the cattail, but you put it back a little bit, you stunt it more or less, and you maybe start opening up some of those, massive, dense stands into something where other things can actually get in there. I remember that talk a little bit.
Yeah.
But a burn's going to be part of a larger plan. I just want your
right.
It's
a holistic approach to all of this stuff, in my opinion.
Exactly, I totally agree.
Yep. But also at the April meeting, we'll be talking about water level management, what the lake's been doing since the ice came off, winter carp monitoring update, and talking about other matters. There's a box on the sign-in sheet. Would you be interested in Rush Lake Watershed membership? One of our directors was at the last meeting and had a Ducks Unlimited sticker on his thing. Why don't we look at having, membership people feel a part of something? It's something that we can create. We don't do it today, but we certainly could create a membership function, which would help can help in certain aspects, and there's just some brainstorming that we could do with that. And also talking about some fundraising opportunities that brought for Cause of the Mondays, and if we want to do anything other this next year. So that's largely what the April meeting will be. Other items, there is, we did have a director resign. Utica believes they found their candidate, but that's an open position currently. But we do have an open at-large seat. With the April meeting, we do need to hold an election of the new board. So if you're interested in that, please mark a box on the sheet and I'll get in touch with you so that you're for consideration. Last, we have 2 minutes, public comment.
The only concern I have right now is water is way too high. Way too high. Because I'm out there every day, and especially during the hunting season. And last year the water got so high that most of the bogs are only being held in place by a few roots. The root systems are almost tore completely apart. We get another heavy rain right now, and some of these big bogs out here tear off because they're floating. God knows where they're going to end up. You could be down at the dam with cranes for a month, 2 months, 3 months. Some of those bogs are huge. You gotta start letting some of this water out.
Yeah, the dam's, just a quick update, the dam's fully open today, right, Ron? And it drops about half an inch a day, so it's under 2.0 now, and the level that's...
It's gotta be a good 1.5 feet above what they normally carry.
The normal maximum is 1.4, so it's 6 or 7 inches higher than that number, but that doesn't mean anything, because the day, I remember I checked, I went down there after all the rain happened, and there was water everywhere. There was water over all the roads. It was crazy flooding, and the dam was at 1.5 on that day, which is basically, it's
the target.
Yeah, the target, and which wasn't true based on driving around the lake. So it takes some time to read out there.
Mother Nature's the boss on the water level. Heavy rains, rapid runoff. I mean, you just stand there some days and hope that the water level doesn't get so high that it's near washing out the dam, and frustrating in the summertime when you can't keep enough water on there, too much evaporation. The dam is a great structure for when we need to draw down the lake. It does an excellent job. But after that, it's Mother Nature.
Can't fool Mother Nature.
Okay, we're at 11, but I'll let her go. Keep.
Well, my first meeting, but I just wanted to compliment the group on what they're doing. I think you're going about it the right way, and thank you for your time for doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Otherwise, we'll adjourn and meet back here April 18th at 7 o'clock.
Can I just want to clarify this, is on the steering committee, the idea is you're going to have at least one person from each township. Is that correct?
That's where I thought we left off, so I'd like to see somebody from each township raise their hand to me.
Okay.
And then I'll put you on the list and we'll work through that list in a couple weeks. Okay. Bruce made a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time today.
Three of us are